guys, it's your girl Candy. So I thought we'd do some reading in the spirit of the earth. People are starting to wake up. I've been up this whole time by myself. Okay. Get away, bumblebee. Shoot. Okay. In the spirit of the earth. You left off just in the beginning of chapter 4. I am inside you. Have no fear. So, let me see how long the part is in chapter 4. For those of you keeping up with me, oh, it's not too long, maybe. Not too bad. Let's see what we can do. I can get through that much. Okay, so let's put the page there. Okay, here we go. It has been nearly 15 years since the South African novelist J.M. Coetzee published his biting satire of conquest and colonization in a short story he called merely The Narrative of Jacob Coetzee, an account of a Dutch merchant's disastrous elephant hunting expedition into Hottentot territory in 1760. The tale is completely riveting, distinguished by its ethnographic accuracy and violent and deranged colonist sentiments, a mockery of all those historical narratives which treat of the reduction of the savage to civility. The narrator, Jacobs, is a relentless imperialist and frontiersman who imagines himself plundered and then captured by unassimilated Hottentots he happened to meet along the way. He vows to avenge himself. Should he providently gain his release, his captors, or are they hosts, do indeed insist that he leave after he has committed what in their eyes is a barbaric act, mutilation of a child who was taunting the pitifully ill Afrikaner. In great satisfaction, he quits their squalid encampment, accompanied by just one of his Hottentot servants. The remainder of this narrative retinue having abandoned their master's brutality for the more congenial company of the villagers. Jacobus relates his tortured yet successful return to civilization and the raid he sponsors shortly thereafter. In a scene that could have been lifted from the Old Testament, the village is put to the torch, and one gets the impression that its inhabitants are systematically butchered, men, women, and children, while the Dutchman's while staff is executed to his enormous satisfaction and amid his expressions of Christian pity. There is a point within the tale where our colonel Superman delivers himself of an exquisite reverie on the metaphysics of the gun and enumeration. It constitutes, I think, the finest and most incisive statement I shall ever see pinpointing the implication and reverberation of that historical mentality which was conceived in the Neolithic. Jacobus begins by confessing that in the wild I lose my sense of boundaries. There is nothing from which my eye turns. I am all that I see. What is there that is not me? The question is absolutely primal, embracing both the biological being, the most fundamental question and confrontation, the body's immune apparatus, and the social realm, to wit, which constitutes self and what non-self. The historical mind responds very differently from the mythic. I am a transparent sack with a black core full of images and a gun, announces the historically minded Jacobus. The gun stands for the hope that there exists that which is other than oneself. The gun is our mediator with the world and therefore our savior. The tidings of the gun, such and such, is outside. Have no fear. The gun saves us from the fear that all life is within us. It does so by laying at our feet all the evidence we need of a dying and therefore a living world. I move through the wilderness with my gun at the shoulder of my eye and slay elephants, hippopotami, rhinoceros, buffalo, etc. I leave behind me a mountain of skin, bones, and inedible gristle and excrement. All this is my dispersed pyramid to life. It is my life's work, my incessant proclamation of the otherness of the dead and therefore the otherness of life. Self and oneself are sharply delimited here, even adversarial. The rifle assures cozy of that illusory separation. Further guarantee is given by his cautious penchant for counting, for quantifying nature. We cannot count the wild. The wild is one because it is boundless. One more cozy approaches that terrible dilemma of self, non-self, but the Neolithic rescues him. We can count fig trees, we can count sheep, because the orchard and the farm are bounded. The essence of the orchard tree and the farm sheep is number. Our commerce with the wild is a tireless enterprise of turning it into orchard and farm. When we cannot fence it and count it, we reduce it to numbers by other means. Every wild creature I kill crosses the boundaries between wilderness and numbers. I have presided over the becoming number of 10,000 creatures. I am a hunter, domesticator of the wilderness, a hero of enumeration. He who does not understand number does not understand death. Nor does such a person understand history, I would add. At the end of this little episode, Jacobus acknowledges that the need for the gun is metaphysical rather than physical. The native tribes have survived without the gun. I could survive in the wilderness armed with only bow and arrow. Did I not fear that so deprived I would perish not of hunger, but of the disease of the spirit that drives the caged baboon to evacuate its entrails? Every territory through which I march with my gun becomes a territory cast loose from the past and bound to the future, the trajectory of history. Here stands Homo historicus, triumphant, rifle in hand, foot planted on the head of the slain other. Cozy's terrible gun has become the perfect instrument of an imagination of fear. Where is the language of courtesy in all of this? Of restraint, where is the animalness and plantness of this man's speech? By imagining the surround into the fearsome other of wilderness and imagining animal and plant being as non-self, the creature which bore the Dutchman Jacob Cozy reveals its rootedness in fear, fear reaching all the way back to the original domestication of the place and its other than human beings, back to the Neolithic. It is inevitable that an imagination of fear will create a language and artifice of fear. This being but another way of saying that an image of fear will create a language and artifice of death. Jacobus Cozy is an eloquent and persuasive spokesman for the impeccable reasonableness of the civilization of death. Know that the civilization of death begin with the microsurgery of separating self from non-self. With this spacious metaphysic that such and such is outside, have no fear. Cozy enunciated it brilliantly. Yet if one is going to disengage from such primal and mythic linkage with the surround, one must perforce relocate oneself in a different dimension, a different matrix of being and meaning. History, the river of time, I would argue, becomes a perfect, more necessary substance and agency of that speech and artifice which seeks to separate self from non-self. The dynamic of such a mad act of aggression inevitably produces a civilization committed to institutionalized ideological acts of death. The imagination of history in and of itself seems to me to encourage such mayhem, ironically always in the name of order, supposedly in the service of cosmos of law at its most fundamental level. Historical consciousness is a death machine. It is a requiem that both sings the mass and wields the knife or the rifle. Starting out as the chronicle of priest kings, history originally was the oral or literary or visual rendering of that exalted being's successes in combating the forces of chaos, of delusion, of evil. The ancient Greeks present something of a special case. For here the state, the polity in certain cases is the guardian of cosmos. But right now I'm more interested in the artifice born of this new Neolithic-inspired historical consciousness, and particularly the gun. The authors have amply charted the historical development of technology. Oh, I'm going to stop here, not there. Okay. In civilizations. It is enough for me to identify the Neolithic as a major conceptual, oral, and artifactual watershed separating the hunter-gatherer conception of the world from our own. From the farming view, there would in time develop, depending on location, an increasingly urbanized and secularized and eventually mechanized and industrialized conception of the earth. Rather than trace that process from the dawn of the Neolithic to modern times, I prefer to consider those elements of speech and artifice that have emerged victorious or ascendant in our own time. To me, the gun is a especially potent symbol and instrument of modern society's changed image of the earth, albeit just one of many symbols and instruments one might select. So, that's the beginning of part 1 of chapter 4, and I'm going to leave off there and try and find Richard. So I hope you guys enjoyed In the Spirit of the Earth by Calvin Luther Martin. Until then, enjoy your day.